Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, Leading the Cloud Transformation, Building the Roadmap. My name is Carol Auth of SANS, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speaker is Jason Lamb, SANS Certified Instructor. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenter, please enter them into the questions window at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Jason.
Great, thank you, Carol. Appreciate the intro. And thank you everyone for joining us today on a Friday. And I am talking to you from here in Raleigh, North Carolina area. The weather is nice here. Hopefully the day is going well for everyone else as well. So in this webcast, we're going to talk about the leading the transformation of towards cloud and how do you build the roadmap. Before we get started with all the content, and by the way, we have lots and lots of content today. It's going to be a pretty heavy webcast. I would like to give you a brief intro of myself first before we get started. My name is Jason Lamb, and in my day job, I work at a really large global financial organization, particularly having a leadership role in the cybersecurity area. Cloud is one of those things that I'm involved in, same as application security, infrastructure security, and so on. And this is actually my 4th year back into the US, and previously I was a CISO in the Asia region, doing the security, arguably in the forefront of where the divider is between us and the enemy line, right? That's what some of the people perspectives are, and learned a lot about leading programs, leading different big initiatives. And yeah, hopefully I can share some of those experiences with you through this webcast. When I'm not doing my day job, I teach and write courses for SANS. That's what I do, and share my passion with all the people around me, sharing what I learned. So this webcast is a good example of that. In terms of the agenda today, we're going to walk through the step-by-step of creating a cloud security roadmap, because a lot of organizations are starting to move towards cloud, and we're going to talk about how do you create that roadmap. And this is not sort of a very high level, but a step-by-step iteration of exactly how you need to do it from a leadership perspective, because you can you can try to do it without a plan, and I bet you won't be very successful. Right? So creating a roadmap, making sure that there are support from the rest of the organization is really crucial. And that's the process that we're going to walk through today. And by the way, a little bit of a shameless pitch here, a plug here, is that some of these material that we're presenting are very similar to an upcoming course that I am writing, which is the MGT 520. That's going to be a course number, and it's going to be the leading cloud security design and implementation course that we're going to debut in later on in the year. I think it's Q3 or Q4 rough time frame. Exact schedule to be determined. So with that, we're going to step into our first slide of the day. What is the cloud security roadmap? Let's define what we're talking about first of all. As I said earlier, cloud security, cloud roadmap is really important, because how else do you actually lead your organization towards the cloud? You need to have a plan to lock down the business support, because ultimately, all these cloud infrastructure doesn't exist if there are no business requirement. So it also helps the organization to prioritize the initiative, because everybody wants to do different things in the cloud. So how do you prioritize them? And locking down the execution timeline and sequencing is really important. Then it ties back into the cost and ownership as well. And it also generally serves multiple purposes. As you iterate through the plan and drop up the plan, then a lot of different dynamics and chemistry start popping up, and it drives a very good conversation across the entire IT functions and across the entire organizations as well. In my experience, talking about the cloud planning and role mapping, particularly to the business end, usually gets you very good results and get really good feedback from the business. A lot of times they may or may not know about some of the cloud transformation, some of the opportunities that got brought together by the cloud environment. And once you have a roadmap and being able to socialize that and doing a little bit of education and campaigning, that usually gets you much further and much more successful securing the business support. And obviously, needless to say, now that you're here with a SANS webcast, the security protection is really an integral part of the cloud security roadmap as well. Security is definitely the centerpiece of it. While it is not the only thing on the roadmap, security is an integral part of it. So with all the dynamics, let's talk about our roadmap of the day, right? So how do you actually create a roadmap? These are the 6 steps that we will be talking about. As I said, it will be a step-by-step approach. We're going to talk about through these 6 steps. You would go from no cloud to cloud, and at least a cloud roadmap. And these are the steps that are most crucial in our mind to actually get organizations planned, having the right discussion, having the right focus, prioritized, and learning about yourself, and also projecting forward to adopt the latest and greatest about security in the cloud. So we're going to dive deeper into each of these steps. Basically, it starts off with determining the goals, right? And when I say the goal, for those of you who are very close to the IT world, you may be thinking about, okay, so I get reliability, I get cost reduction. Those are crucial, but to the rest of the organization, there are going to be more than just the IT side of the benefit. So the goals are shared, not just IT, but also to the rest of the organization. For example, the agility that you can acquire or you can get out of the cloud environment, and so on. Those would benefit not just you, but the business side as well. And then getting the understanding, step 2, getting the understanding about your current environment so that you can plan. If you don't know your current environment, it's very hard to plan, right? And then benchmarking or getting benchmarking against some industry pattern or framework, something to follow through, right? It's a little bit of a guideline, guardrail to help you plan so that you're aligned. Sometimes it's a little difficult to come up with something if you're not familiar with it, but these industry framework helps you to make sure that you stay on the center lane. And then obviously there are analysis. Once you get all your dynamics, all your requirements captured, you have to do the analysis and then creating the roadmap. But last step there is about communicating the plan. You can have the best plan. If you keep it in your drawer, not let anyone know, that doesn't do you any good, right? So communicating, locking down support, securing funding, getting support is really crucial. So those are the steps that we're going to dive deeper into it. And the first step that, out of that process is really, what is your goal, right? Defining your goal of moving to the cloud is really the first step here. Well, first thing first, right? A lot of people get really excited about moving to the cloud, particularly the IT folks, right? Some of it is like, hey, we can have probably unlimited capacity if we pay for it. That kind of stuff excites a lot of people. And but your customer may or may not care about or require your organization to use the cloud to deliver service, right? So what is it that actually allow your organization to do? And when I say organization, I don't just mean IT or security and so on, but the strategy need to be defined. And definition of it is rarely an IT-based decision. Usually in my experience, getting together with the business, sitting down, educating the business, lying about the opportunities that are on the table, why moving to the cloud allow them to move much quicker, and also, then the demand drives the cost at a much more linear fashion, and so on. Those helps the driving the goals. And once you lock down that, then the goals will drive what your security requirements are and your cloud migration pattern. For example, if the business is willing to, just do a, investment into making sure that you re-platform or refactor all your existing workload, well, that's a lot of coding, right? Then your life may be a little bit easier in your cloud journey, or not, right? Depending on what the expectations are. So setting up the goals first, make sure that everybody is in lockstep, so that it's not like, hey, why are IT or why is security doing this? So that's really the cloud goal to be set. And for that discussion, here are some of the opportunities that are offered by the cloud environment. I'm going to go for it pretty quickly because I'm sure you can read up on it at multiple places. The company who are doing cloud environment like the AWS, Google, and so on, they do a wonderful job here in selling the solution to you. So scalability, reliability, cost predictability, those are very obvious, right? Like, hey, I only consume, or I only pay for what I consume. So and some of the slightly less obvious items, in terms of the opportunity are like, your security feature right there for your adoption. So, it's a matter of consuming certain security services. Once you turn it on, then you get access to it. It helps you a lot, right? Instead of spending the capital expenditure to go and build certain solution, and 6 months later, maybe you get some benefit. Most of these are very turnkey and very quick. You will be able to get the benefits on a very rapid basis. The accessibility, hey, everything is internet connected. So it helps you. And the hidden agenda there is, the accessibility also comes with a high cost of risk as well. But, something that we can talk more about, right? And then depending on the cloud service offering, auto update is great. I bet you that none of the people on this webcast are like to do like patching, maintaining certain version of software. Those are not what we set out to do, right, in general. And those have high costs, and you need to maintain a staff of many different disciplines in order to support the environment. So it helps you to simplify the IT environment, reduce the complexity for sure. And again, most people don't get excited when they wake up in the morning and go to work. Hey, I'm gonna go roll out Microsoft patches. Well, some people, that's their job, and I get it. But yeah, that's not what the core focus of the IT function, right? And in terms of the business transformation, right? Like earlier we talked about, yeah, you get the cloud benefit from a technical side. What are some of the things that are potentially beneficial to the business? And these are where, the IT folks can generally sell to the rest of the business to ensure that the business actually leverage the function, the capabilities of the cloud to benefit the business, right? Like it's not just so much about, okay, we're going to save some cost, but if you create your roadmap correctly, lead to a very good state, very mature state within the cloud, you not only can save cost, reduce outages, but you also gain a lot of new capabilities. And some of the new capabilities are like the, for example, the agility, a little bit to do with cost, right? So initially, well, you're not going to, I still remember, right? Like I think I started my career in the financial security world. at an investment bank. And agility is really important, right? Like, I have I still remember that, some of the conversations about, hey, the next bank is offering this. We need to do it now, right? Like, how many weekends can you later can you start going in, putting it into production? Like, we're talking about in terms of weeks for something really huge. So, ability to try and build something very quick and also turn it down, right? Like some of the service offering, I've seen service offering that only last a couple months. Hey, not a good idea. Okay, let's stop it, right? It gives business that decision on a very quick basis. There's hardly any capital spend on it, right? Like particularly on the infrastructure side, hey, it's all there, right? Like you just put the program there, your code there, and also you put your data there, and then it runs, right? So giving you that agility to the business, so that they can do things a lot quicker. And obviously that ties into some of the faster development and prototyping as well. In general, these ties into the agile, the DevOps movement, so that at the end of the day, it's quicker iteration, you fail fast, and it helps the business to get into the right business model very quickly. Cost and labor effectiveness, we already covered some of that. But then, if it is just cost alone, generally, your journey only goes so far, right? Like it's all is about the cost savings, it's about the reliability, but it's also about the advancement to the business line as well. And we also look at the security side as well. The availability and some of the pre-built security enhancement are great, right? The ability to store many gigs and gigs of logs and be able to search through it very quickly, not really bounded by, oh, I need to buy another server, right? That really helps with the security as well, because hey, everybody is doing a lot of big data analysis with security logs these days, trying to figure out whether the bad guys are already on your network. These are, huge benefit to the business and to the technical folks as well. And it also drives better collaboration. Think about it. All these things are already existing. Generally, the cloud environment is existing. You just need to subscribe to it, and it drives different kind of collaboration. Because you can't just say, okay, I have a month to wait to build it. We'll figure it out. Usually, it drives a different engagement model. Arguably much quicker, much more tied in, and with particularly the DevOps movement, right? It encourages the innovation and creativity. So these are the business objectives or the business goals that a lot of organizations are looking at. And one thing that I also want to iterate here is that the cloud is not just an extension of your data center, right? If you do just that, yeah, you can get started. But that's not likely your end all be all. If you're going to spend the effort of creating the roadmap, that's likely not your end state. Maybe you do need to start off with just extending your data center to the cloud, but that definitely isn't the end state for most of the organizations out there. And then integrating security into the cloud is really crucial. But then, again, security is not, usually not the biggest selling point in most of the business. But then, we need to do it. Is a effective and very crucial component to the entire cloud strategy. And I urge that most the security management team here that are listening on this webcast, do not be that no team. Well, what I mean by that is, sometimes you hear, and I still hear some of my peers saying that, hey, well, I'm not going to do that because we're not ready for it. Well, sometimes whether you're ready or not, the business or the rest of the IT folks will need or want to go there. And if you're not ready, you'll get bypassed, right? So being the no team generally don't get you very far. Initially, you may have to, hey, putting the if you want to do this, this is how you do it. That's much more of a collaborative approach, and that generally goes well with the successful organization in this particular area. So there are lots to be said on that, and security can definitely be part of the goal. And and even as a centerpiece in some of the roadmap that I have personally seen, right? Like driving security forward can be very crucial and important to the cloud security strategy. So once you define the goal with the business line, on the IT side, and also understanding what the business drivers are, then the next phase is going back to the IT area and understanding, hey, what is the current environment? You'll be surprised, right? Like organizations that have over 10,000 computers and so on, like at some point you lose track of all the details. And when you migrate to cloud, it's a big change. And all these information need to be gathered in a very, very organized manner. Otherwise, the migration will fail, right? And there are tons of horror stories that are out there of organizations not migrating so well, as they try to go to the cloud. Hey, I forgot about this database connection and so on, and it doesn't work. It makes the migration and the operations of the cloud very difficult at first. Most of the organizations just tough it out, but hey, if you do well here about collecting your current state, you will do much better and you'll save yourself a lot of time. So collecting information about your infrastructure environment, such as your hardware, operating system, data store, your service catalog, and end of life status and technology upgrade roadmap. These are crucial because what you can do, for example, with the end of life, like, hey, you're updating those anyways. Wouldn't it be nice if you just put it on the cloud environment, using the infrastructure as a service, offering, or even platform as a service? That may save you a little bit of headache, right? So that's why we're collecting those information. And it's also the security stances as well. How do you currently do logging? How do you do monitoring? Because some of those things will change, and collecting the information about them is essential for you to help plan it out and know what your transformation look like. Then you have your process and application information that you also want to collect. This create, for example, the process side, create your baseline, knowing, for example, how fast, how soon you can do certain things. And once you migrate to the cloud, you may be amazed, building in all the automation and so on. You may be setting up a goal of certain KPI and being able to measure it later. And that would demonstrate whether your cloud roadmap strategy are actually successful. Capacity management process, because cloud, if you don't manage your capacity management, if you do not manage that area well, you're going to waste a lot of money. So those are crucial process that make sure that you get your current state, understand what you're doing, and figure out whether you have the right framework to manage your cloud environment. And then the application as well, like what are some of the development framework that you're using? For example, later on, if you definitely want to move to serverless, these are crucial things to figure out, hey, does the cloud provider support that particular development model or that development framework? So those are the important factor to collect. And once you collect all those information, during the process of it, you may find out that, hey, my organization, I didn't know, but hey, my organization are already on the cloud. Particular areas, and there are certainly some shadow IT factors as well in today's organization. A lot of organizations may be using, Dropbox, Google Drive, Zoom, all these different cloud services. These days it's rather difficult to say no to cloud because, even very, very insistent organization, of saying no to cloud are already using cloud, right? So, as you plan out your roadmap, rather than prohibiting, hey, why are you doing that? Shutting people down, maybe those are your good candidate to be, your pilot group as well, because at some point you're going to have some close allies, and these existing shadow IT, hey, they exist for a reason. People don't just go and say, oh, I want to try this out. Some people do, but there's usually a legitimate reason business-wise to drive the usage of those cloud services. So getting them on board early on, that usually helps you, right? Like studying them as some of the pilot may actually help you a lot. And then you will, at the same time of that, you will also want to develop your vision and projection as well. Understanding your current state, understanding the goals of the organization, that helps you to plan it out, right? That gives you the ability to say, hey, I want to get to this particular point. What does the end state look like? This is where you can project a little bit forward to say, hey, I heard about these different capabilities that, from a security standpoint, right? I would like to try out. For example, if you don't have automated incident response capability, like for example, AWS particularly has certain offering that makes that process a lot easier, right? Like I'm not saying that, hey, everything can be automated, but it helps the incident response process. And it also, for example, there are certain security capabilities that you can acquire. Those are some of the future needs that you can plan for as well. And evaluate where the benefit and cost make sense and to be included in the goals as well. Now, the other thing is about looking back at your competitors and industry and intelligence. Sometimes it's a lot easier to sell security if your competitor are at a particular level and they're doing certain things. It makes the case much stronger. If everybody is complying to a certain regulation in a certain way, then when you can't beat them, join them, right? So likely you have very similar compliance and security requirements to your competitors. Joining them, talking to them, and getting some insight and learning about what they do makes sense. And how do we do that? Well, either you have industry sharing group, the different ISAC organizations, generally organized, like-minded organization, like the healthcare industry, the financial industry, the government, the public sector have sharing group that allows you to join up and team up with your peers to talk about what your experiences are with certain, components. And those are good starting point. And then your cloud vendors like the AWS, Google, Microsoft, they have different conferences to study different customers, and their own experience in the format of case studies. Those help a lot as well, because hey, it's better to learn from the mistakes of others. And I have been watching some of these, case studies for a very long time now. There are some that are just marketing. There are some that are very, very good and revealing. Like some of the organizations are more honest, and they basically tell you, yep, this is how it went. These are the good, and these are the bad. And those usually help you to develop your roadmap a lot better. And then we also want to talk a little bit about the cloud adoption framework. At this point, you have understanding of your goal, you have understanding about your environment, what your competitors or peers are doing. So what do you do with all that, right? The next ingredient that you want to mix in is about the cloud adoption frameworks. And these are written by some of the industry bodies, industry vendors, as best practices. And I am not particularly saying, hey, just grab one of the roadmap, one of the framework, and make that your roadmap. That usually does not work. You have to figure out, analyze them and adopt certain components to make your plan, to make it your own plan and make it successful. So over here, we're going to talk about 3 different frameworks that are out there that are more popular than most others. They are the AWS one, the Google one, and the Microsoft one. These are the adoption framework. And one thing that you will notice, and we're going to talk very briefly about each of them. One thing that you're going to find out interesting about them is that they call out security as part of the framework. So, security is not like an upstream battle, but more, all these industry framework help position security as part of the, transition, as part of the transformation. So it helps the message, and it helps with the, making sure that we're handling security appropriately and making sure that we've considered all the right areas. So first framework that we're going to go over here is the AWS one. AWS, Amazon does a very good job at, writing these documents. And one thing about it is that you will find that is about the business perspective and the technical perspective. And it's rather, this adoption framework is rather high level. Cutting out, there's a little bit more perspective here. Like basically they cut it into 6 different perspectives. And the left-hand side being corresponding to the business side, and the right-hand side being the technical side. And each of these perspectives, Amazon does have additional documentation on each of the perspectives. So it's not just at this level. I would generally say that the AWS information are relatively high level, on the cloud adoption side, right? Like they're very, very, very good at the technical documentation on how to use some of the features in the cloud in their own product offering. But then, to help gauge the organizations onto their cloud, their documentation is relatively high level. But having said that, right, the security perspective that we saw in the last slide also divide further into the directive, preventative, and also detective and responsive component, and they have different guidance for each of those components. So these are the key points that in AWS mind, they think that all customers need to consider all these points, right? There are not a whole lot of documentation from them on exactly how to do certain things, and then it ties back into some of the product offering, right? So getting a roadmap becomes a little bit difficult if you just follow the AWS side. Like, because okay, so which one do I do first out of all these items? That may be a question that you're gonna ask after you read through the AWS item. And I do agree with every single item here, right? Like, it's not that I don't agree, but then prioritizing becomes a different art form. Now, having said all that, sounds like I'm not up for AWS. I do like their framework. I'm not only highlighting it so that you understand where it falls short and where it is very strong. And the Google one, Google has a similar cloud adoption framework. You can tell that it's a very different angle, right? So Google actually organized this framework using a maturity-based model, meaning they basically have 4 different epics. And well, you can see it as 4 different pillars. And they see security as very essential, right? Right inside, is the very center of the cloud adoption model. That's what they say. And hey, I personally definitely agree with it. And the way that Google's adoption model are probably the highest level, right? Like, I'm not saying that it's the best, but it's very high level. And there's not a whole lot of execution details and on the how, but more about, hey, these are the things that you want to think about, right? But then what I like about them is that it's very simple. And also they organize it into, hey, the beginning is at this level, right? And then more strategic, you move to the middle. And then when you get really good, transformational, you're at a high maturity level in each of these epics, then you would be doing these work. So they classify it, in a maturity sense so that you understand, hey, I want to go and work on the tactical stuff first. And then I can move on to, the strategic and later on think about the transformational. And then within this security epic, this is the view of, what's the activities that Google consider as tactical, strategic, and also transformational, okay? So there are sort of a staircase effect that you can slowly adopt certain level of capabilities within the cloud to mature your security model. So that's what the Google adoption framework is about. They do have additional documentation out of below these guidance, but then honestly it becomes more of a product documentation than anything else at that point. So that's the Google framework. And then last but not least is also the Microsoft, the Azure adoption framework. And this framework actually is the one that I personally recommend the management team to read first. If you're in the management area, this is the framework you want to read first, right? And then try to understand this, and then the other framework using those as references. The reason why I say that is that the Microsoft one is actually very sequential and more of a step-by-step approach. They tell you, okay, exactly, go and define your own strategy, do the technical planning, and then figure out whether you're ready, doing all the final testing, and make sure that you have all the guidelines, the best practice ready to go. And then you can start migrating and adopting. And then those are supported by the governance, and also you have to figure out how you're going to manage and operationalize things. So that becomes a very I would say a management savvy framework that you can probably adopt from a step-by-step approach. So this is the framework that I generally recommend people to look at. And just as any other Microsoft documentation, they tend to be very well written. And if you go take a look at their framework, it's very, very, very elaborate and gives you a lot more guidance, than the Amazon and also the Google one. And for the governance side, these are the things that they ask you to think about. So it's not just so much of a security play, and it's not just so much of a technical play, but also, hey, cost management, resource consistency. Like these are the things that as management I would want to think about, right? And some of these tend to be a little bit more process driven and so on, but nonetheless very important. So I would definitely recommend the first iteration of everyone going through their own respective cloud security roadmap. You would want to take a look at the Azure one and figure out how you actually map to it, and how do you actually compare to it, and then adopt some of the Google and also the AWS component into it as well, right? Yeah, so I would definitely recommend the Azure one as a follow-along guide, reference material for IT and also business. They even give guidance to the business side that are very business savvy, right? In the right language that you can just say, hey, here, take a look at this link, and written in the right, simplicity, very concise. So I definitely highly recommend it. But then the Google one, the good thing about it is that it states the maturity side very well. So, hey, these are the things that you want to consider first, and then these other ones later. So, how and what to do about the high maturity state is laid out for you. And then the AWS one being, giving you the high level considerations. But the good thing about it is that they're comprehensive in terms of the coverage of it. So it covers a wider technical area, and I would definitely recommend that you use that as a guide to make sure that you didn't miss anything. So that's how I would recommend the frameworks. And am I suggesting that you can just follow the framework? No, right? Validate your own priorities against this framework is what I recommend you to do. And it's good justification for being the core focus of security being the core focus, because third party telling you about it usually hold much more weight, right? And then we get into once you compare and review some of these industry framework, you would want to go into the analysis process in your own roadmap, right? So what you're doing here is Now that you have a lot of different requirements, you've seen the industry, you've seen your own, then you need to analyze all the data that you've gathered. And the next few slides basically are some of the considerations that you also need to pay attention to. So, at the end of the day, you are trying to prioritize them because, no organizations can do everything all in one shot. I don't know of any. If you know of some, let me know. I may want to go work there, right? So it's iterative steps, and which is why you create a roadmap, right? You create different milestones. These are the more important things, and here's why. And that you can articulate to the business and get their support as well. And what it comes down to is, discretionary, non-discretionary, which ones are more crucial to deliver first, right? And then there are cost and resource considerations as well. So what are some of the considerations that you need to take into, your roadmap? For example, like some of the things that you may want to consider is, listen to your IT partners, right? They may have a particular requirement on certain sequencing of, adoption. They may decide, yep, it's going to be a lift and shift of all the existing servers, all the existing workload, or maybe part of the existing workload into the cloud. Like, okay, one-to-one replacement. If I have a server in my data center, I'm just going to move it to the cloud. That would be more of usually a infrastructure as a service move. That's quite different than a SaaS, right? Like the service offering is quite different. So there are different requirements in security that you may need to develop. And if you are only doing, for example, the IS, which is infrastructure as a service, you may not need to develop all your strategy for the platform as a service just yet, right? If your initial adoption is decided by, between the business and your IT teams, okay, well, we're just going to do IS infrastructure move, lift and shift for now. Then that makes things, a little bit simpler. And those are your more tactical requirements at this point of time. But having said that, right, like certain preparation are required prior to migrating all the workload. For example, some of the virtual security, virtual network security architecture, you definitely need that, right? And then some of the IAM security guidelines, like identity, are really, really crucial. So some of the things those are things that you want to consider. And then the other things to consider is your current security policy, right? If your organization, well, not a matter of if, all organizations should have a security policy. How does the cloud align to your policy? You need to at least meet those objectives and then determine what else to add to your existing policy. Because the moment you want to do cloud, everybody find out, yeah, they have different interpretation, they may do something different. So you would want to consider, hey, where are we? What are we driving towards? Oops, sorry. Yep. And then, at least you want to maintain the current security goals. That's why you want to take the current security policy into consideration. And then your security roadmap today, right? Regardless of cloud, you should have a security roadmap. How does that align? For example, if you are already, setting out to do encryption everywhere or something like that, right? Those are the things that you would want to consider. How do I extend that to the cloud? Usually the journey is not hard, right? Like it's usually some of these capabilities are actually easier to adopt. You still need a plan for it. And one thing that I do advise people to do is, as you are planning out your cloud roadmap, take a look at the industry framework for cybersecurity, like such as the NIST cybersecurity framework, otherwise known as CSF, some of the CIS control, to make sure that your cloud security are going to align with all these frameworks. Sometimes what you'll find is that, hey, particularly those people who do the refactoring, replatforming, as you adopt a new development model, hey, sometimes certain things get thrown out the window and you forgot about it, right? These frameworks help you ensure that you can benchmark against, them, and that you don't forget about certain things. Now, when I talk to a lot of folks, in the management area about planning out the security for cloud, there seems to be a lot of, ooh, I don't know what it means, and that's why it's scary, right? But the good news here is that there are organizations out there that have helped map out some of those bad, scary stuff that the news media tend to talk about, right? So there are two particular framework that I want to introduce you to. One of them is the CSA, like Cloud Security Alliance. This is an organization that actually is very much behind cloud security. And they publish a yearly document on top threats to cloud computing. It's free, by the way. And this is a list of top threats and vulnerabilities in the cloud environment. It is it's pretty high level. It's not technical. For example, I think the first one in the last year is data breach, right? Like they're like, okay, you could have data breach in your cloud computing, right? So that's a threat, that's a risk that they are highlighting to you. So it's not just so much of a, hey, a technical term that you've never heard of. It's more of a general themes that you need to worry about. Now, the next one is the MITRE ATT&CK framework. For those of you who have been in the cybersecurity world for a while, you would have heard about this attack framework because their objective is to map all the TTP, like all the activities, all the how, the activities that the bad guys generally do into an organized framework. And one of the side project that they have been doing, I should say, is mapping those threat vectors and those methodologies that the bad guys are using into the cloud environment. So, what you're seeing here at the bottom of the slide are the outcome of that. These are the threats the technical threats that they know that the bad guys have been doing. For example, lateral movement. There are specific ways that the bad guys are doing it in the cloud. And these are some of the consideration points for you. So, this is to help you get confident about planning, to say, to reduce the unknown factor, right? So these are the considerations, and obviously everyone have budget and resource constraint. Even though you have the best strategy, even though you have planned it out the best, hey, can you deliver at the end, right? So making sure that you understand your current state of your resource and budget capability are really important. So the SWOT exercise helps you, and the traditional resource planning techniques also can help you in this area as well, right? The objective is to determine what capacity do I have? Do I have the extra resource to plan for the transition, the transformation to cloud or not? And over here, all those things that I have talked about, the considerations are mapped out in this diagram. This is sort of the wrap up of all the considerations that you need to do. And the centerpiece here is really the next step, right? Like all these different considerations coming into play. For example, the threat vector that we were talking about, the risk and the threats were here, right? The attack framework are here in the purple, and the business goals and so on are in the red. And then on the right-hand side, you would consider your constraint, your scope and your timeline, and so on. At the bottom, these are your industry benchmarking, all those different things from like your Google, your Azure, and so on, and your NIST cybersecurity framework. Those are the benchmark that you want to consider as well. So all these things get into priority analysis, and you would want to insert them all into sort of a decision matrix. And here is a method that we developed to, for everybody to, help organize their prioritization process. So for example, you may think about, yep, I need to do cloud key management for your encryption key. How does that align to your business goal? Does it make sense? For example, if it aligns very well, right? Then it becomes a 4 or a 5. And how much security benefit? Well, you may consider that as a 5 because, hey, it does help your security a lot by managing the key for you in an effective manner. So giving it from 0 to 5 and then putting it into a matrix like this, the key highlight here is once you get all that stuff done, then you get a prioritization score. And that score can help you rank each of these items to figure out whether certain things are a good idea or bad idea, right? And a hidden agenda here is, alignment with business goals. Sometimes, talking to your that earn you or get you a conversation with your business line, and make sure that you take in their feedback as well, right? So that helps you to make sure that you secure the buy-in from other stakeholders, and so that's really the security matrix to actually get you to score and rank each of the item. And some of them are going to end up with higher priority. Well, then you rank them, from top to bottom, top being the highest priority. And then you do one more round of figuring out things, right? Like some adjustments may have to be made after you talk to your partners, and also after you talk to sometimes your regulators, right? For example, over here, my illustration here is, oh, you figure out, oh, that key management thing that we were talking about, oh, is actually a compliant, for example, it may be a regulatory audit requirement, that you get flagged last year that you promised the regulator that you're going to fix. Oh, is not a priority 2 anymore. Now this becomes 1, right? And then you got to evaluate the resource and timeline impact to make sure that you can deliver it at the end, right? Like if you're going to change a priority, then you're absorbing more, and maybe you need additional resources, to be able to do that. And here is an example. I know it's an eye chart, but just to illustrate that, the roadmap can look something like this. In this particular example, what we have in phase 1 and phase 2, this particular organization is taking more of a lift and shift approach. So lifting existing server into the cloud. So building security governance is important, getting IAM set up, identity management set up, and making sure that you create a VPN to the cloud environment so that your data going back and forth are secure, your data center and your cloud environment are secure. There are lots of planning in phase 1, and in phase 2, it seems that that's where the migration actually starts, right? And one other thing that I want to highlight is the baseline. There are certain security baseline that you need to create as part of your planning, and then on the phase 2 side, there are different iteration or advancement. Like, for example, improvement in identity, ensuring that, for example, your corporate Active Directory is also, expanded to the cloud environment as well. Those are crucial, but maybe not crucial in the first phase, right? Like, because it takes some time to actually get there. And then on the IT side, the application side may have certain break fix, and they may need to execute on certain migration waves and so on. So, there are certain priorities for the business line as well, for security as well. This is more of an illustration. And then phase 3 could be something that this particular organization is trying to do refactoring at this point. So basically recoding certain applications for the key applications to make sure that they adopt the best practices, almost like a cloud native approach to cloud, so that you're not just lifting some servers there anymore. You're actually using the best cloud offerings to run your workload. So you become much more efficient, and your outcome are likely going to be much better. So you also see a much more progressive security improvement from phase 1 through 3 as well. So that's your outcome of using your input, the different considerations, mapping it into a consideration matrix, scoring them, prioritizing them, and then getting into this roadmap. And the agenda here is also making sure that there are lockstep actions to the rest of the organization. Just by IT doing something or just by security doing something, that isn't going to be successful. It needs to be supporting each other, and having that conversation is really crucial, right? That's why the goals need to be shared across the organization, and then the delivery need to be in lockstep. And one other thing that I also want to highlight here is options, right? A lot of times you're like, okay, here's how we're going to do it. But then the business may have a different opinion. The IT may have different opinion. Consider different options, right? Like present different options to strike that roadmap, right? You're likely going to encounter that a lot. Be flexible. Certain things and you're not going to compromise. For example, over here, option one, well, I'm not going to have any options that have one security block. That's not good enough, right? Certain things you're not compromising, but hey, for the rest of it, the pace of it, and the budget, there may be some options there, right? Just keep that in mind. Having just one single way of doing it may not be the best way to do it, right? Sometimes there may be other dynamics within the organization that you need to incorporate as well. And then lastly, you also want to make sure that your plan, your roadmap is communicated properly, right? Plan the communication, make sure that you define the value of the security initiatives within the roadmap. Because a lot of times, other people are like, hey, why are you spending so much money? And, this is exactly why, explaining your actions and how it ties in with the business side, what are some of the outcomes, what are some of the benefits that the organization will get out of it is really crucial, right? Like risk, reduction is one thing, but sometimes it actually drives, security can drive efficiency and so on as well. Making sure that your message is simple is important, right? Be prepared to get the feedback and take actions to adjust your roadmap, your component of the roadmap is also crucial as well. So that's basically it for today. I've gone through the entire step-by-step of how do you create a roadmap, what are some of the data sources that you can actually take in, some of the industry benchmarking, how do you actually organize your own data gathering to get, and the prioritization process to get to the roadmap. How do you actually work with the others in your organization to get to, a very cohesive roadmap that you can actually execute on? Was the topic that we discussed. And again, like you'll find more if you like this content, you'll find more of it at the upcoming SANS course that we're going to debut at the end of the year. So that's it for now. And Carol, I'm going to turn it back to you to see what questions we have gathered so far.
All right, thanks, Jason. I'm not seeing any questions at the moment, and we're just about at the end of the time. So I'd like to give people just a minute here in case they have any questions that they'd like to submit to the questions window. While we wait, I want to remind everyone that a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. All right, so a question came in. It says, how about switching between cloud providers?
Sorry, can you repeat the question one more time, please, Carol?
Sure. It asks, how about switching between cloud providers?
Okay, that's an excellent question, right? So I actually like that question a lot because most of the folks nowadays and most of the organizations are not using one single provider. They're usually, either forced or, just necessary to be multi-cloud, right? And generally in the roadmap, if you look at some of the roadmap like this, right? It does impact your roadmap. You do need to comprehend that as well. But then, it does drive up, for example, over here, you have your baseline IS, so, if you're using, for example, AWS and Google, you would likely have to have a baseline configuration for AWS and then for Google as well, right? So those are the changes. But then from the overall goal and from the overall approaches, that doesn't change things too much. You do factor in additional resources, and there are certain level of changes. From a technology standpoint, most of the organizations generally see them as, yep, it's different vendors. There are certain things that are different, but then there are a lot of commonalities as well. For example, if I need encryption all across, all the data set within my cloud, all the providers, all the AWS, Google, and so on supports that as well. So there are centralized management platform that people are adopting to help ease some of those requirements to go multi-cloud. So yeah, hopefully that answered the question. And feel free to circle back if that doesn't.
All right, thanks. What is the desired level of detail to give on a roadmap?
Um, it okay. So what is the desired level of detail? It depends on the organization. I would say that on the roadmap, the most crucial thing about the roadmap from a process standpoint is to make sure that you're aligned with the rest of the stakeholder. Because hey, it would be really horrible if the business is aiming one way, the expectation is one way, but then the delivery is aiming towards another angle, right? That would be bad. But then I think from a documentation, from a detail level perspective, is what everybody is most comfortable about. What it comes down to is the timeline and also what we're doing. That is the most important, right? And then I see that as there are two versions of it. One is a little bit more of the what of the roadmap, and then another version of it is a little bit more on the how, right? Like more technical aspect of it. For example, over here we say, hey, establish a VPN. What does that really mean, right? Like what is the technical aspect of it? There are more detail that need to come out of it, but that becomes a little bit more on the execution side. From a roadmap, when you get to the stakeholders, remember the communication side, we need to keep the message simple. So I would say that you would definitely want a different version for different audience. And the more detail you have, the better results you're likely going to get. And that means that you also are planning better. So yeah, I hope that answered the question.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much, Jason, for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.